If you're a Go developer that uses AWS, you'll probably need to work with the AWS Go SDK at some point. The AWS SDK is available in most modern programming languages. We will just be focusing on the Go SDK, but all SDKs work in a similar way. They are used to interact with different AWS services and makes working with AWS programmatically much easier, but it is not suitable to be used for everything you need to do. There are times when you should use an infrastructure as code tool like Terraform, the CDK, or CloudFormation instead of the SDK. You should use an AWS SDK when interacting with AWS services from applications, like querying the data in a DynamoDB table. You should use an infrastructure as code tool when creating and managing infrastructure in AWS, such as S3 buckets or DynamoDB tables. Before we start, there's just some things we need to make sure before using the SDK. Obviously, you need to have an AWS account before you can use the SDK. And you also need to have Go version 1.23 or higher installed on your machine, since that's the minimum version required by the SDK. Okay, so to start using the SDK, the Go SDK, just come to the SDKs page. If you look up AWS Go SDK, you'll find this link. This page will have all the links to the other websites that we'll need. If you go scroll down, you'll see all the resources. These are different links to different pages that are helpful. Developer guides are just a few guides you might find handy when you're getting started. SDK code examples, that's a GitHub repo, just with some different examples on using different services in AWS and how you can use them with the Go SDK. You can even look at the Go source code if you want. But for now, I'm just going to focus on the API reference documentation. That's the main one I use when using the SDKs. It has all the documentation for the different services, the different packages that are in the Go SDK. You can see here there's packages for all the different services in Go, as well as a few other different packages, kind of like features, examples, different things like that. But this service one is the main one. That has all the documentation for the different services in AWS. And just up the start for getting started, we're just going to copy this page just to get started with the Go SDK. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy these. We're going to copy all three links. The first two are kind of core packages you need to actually use the SDK, and the third link here is just the DynamoDB package. So in our example, we're just going to get some DynamoDB tables, and we're going to show how you can interact with DynamoDB with the Go SDK. So if we go to our Go code, before we can install these packages, we obviously need to have a Go mod file. So we'll go mod init, and I'll just call my module test. And then I'm just going to paste these links, and that'll install the different packages. You might notice that we're on, it's all V2, AWS Go SDK V2. You see it's all V2. The main difference between version 1 and version 2 is that in V2, everything is modular, which means everything is a module, you install everything separately. That can be a bit cumbersome, having to download all these packages, but it means we don't pull down the whole SDK when we don't need all of it. We only need bits and pieces. So it leads to smaller binaries. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our code. There's an example here. If you want to follow that, it's perfectly fine. It's doing everything I'm going to do anyway. I'm just going to write it out manually. So whenever we're using the SDK, we need to create a config. So I'm going to do that. And I am going to do that, we use the config package that we installed. And we use this function load default config. And I'm just going to create a context here real quick because we need that, pass that into all the functions. CTX. So yeah, right now we have a config. I'm actually going to ignore the error. These functions return errors, but I don't really want them right now. Actually, I will keep them. So if error is not equal to nil, I'm just going to panic if I get an error. Sorry. Error, yeah. So here we have a config. That's an AWS config, and the config is it's configuration for the SDK. It's just some default settings like regions, different things like that. How you want the SDK to behave, basically. I always use the default config. The only thing I really change is the region. But if you want to change the region and don't use a default one, what you can do is you can do config.withRegion. This function allows you to pass in lots of different options functions. and that'll just change the settings in the SDK. So I just want to set my region to EU West 1 because that's the one I use when I'm using AWS. So what we're going to do, so this is here now. We have a configuration, and I'll show you now why we need a configuration. So what I want to do is I want to use DynamoDB. So I'm going to install the DynamoDB package. And you can see here, what we do is we need to create a client. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to create a client. And you can see here, this is a DynamoDB client, and the DynamoDB client is how we call Dynamo APIs. And obviously I just need to pass in the context. I'm not sure why that's giving an error. Not sure what I was looking for here. Oh, sorry, passing the context, I need to pass in the config. So yeah, this is why we need the config, because whenever we're creating a client, we need to pass in the AWS configuration we want to use. Here, so I'm just passing in the configuration, and that returns a DynamoDB client. So when I now open this client, and I see it has access to all the different DynamoDB APIs. If you want to look what exactly is going on here, if we scroll down, open the services tab and go down here, we can go to the DynamoDB package, and we can go into the module, and we can see all the different functions that it has, functions, types, everything that's in this package. I'm not going to use this because I just use the IntelliSense that goes on. So what I want to do is list the tables, and I'm going to pass in a context, and you'll see here each function in the Go SDK takes an input function or an input variable. So that is usually the name of the function you're calling, followed by an input. So here, this function takes list tables input, and it's also a pointer, so we just need to do that. And then you can see that. Yeah. And then if we look at the documentation, we can see it takes a list table input. There's different options you can pass in, and it also returns a list tables output, and that's the response from the API. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to ignore the error for now. Actually, no, I won't again. Copy this. Should probably create them, and then no. So yeah, I just want to print the response from this, and I'm just going to print the different. These are just the tables I have in my AWS account. So when I try to run this, we'll just go run main.go. You'll get an error. I get an error. You might get a different error. It depends on if you've used the SDK before. You might get a different error here, but all the errors will basically be saying the same thing, that you can't authenticate, your token is wrong, something like that. And that just means the SDK can't connect to your AWS account. When we load the config, it handles all of this. It handles authentication and all that stuff. But if there's no way it can authenticate, you're going to get this error. There's multiple ways we can authenticate the SDK, and I will be doing a different video on that, all the different ways we can do it. But for now, I'm just going to show you a quick one. It's not the recommended way to do it, but I just find it the easiest just for now. So I'm just going to go to IAM, and I'm going to go to users, and I'm going to create just a test user. Just call them test. Need to give the user permissions. The user will be the one executing the APIs. So if the user doesn't have the permissions you need, you won't be able to call the API. I'm just going to give it admin access, and we'll go to next and create the user. So we'll go into our test user. We'll go into security credentials, and here we're going to use access keys to authenticate the SDK. So if I'm going to create an access key, it's asking me why I want to use it, and the reason it's asking this is because it doesn't want you doing this. So if I click these different options, it's going to tell me a different way I can do it. I'm just going to click other, because I don't want to deal with this right now. I'm not going to give it a name, and it creates some access keys. You can download these. Make sure you don't share these, or whoever has your access keys will be able to access your account, which you don't want. So you copy these two values, access key, secret access key, and what you do is you set them. You can either put them as strings in your code, which is really not recommended. But what I like to do is I like to add them as environment variables. So I have this just a shell script here. And what you do is you have to use these variable names, because when you load the SDK, it will look for these environment variables to authenticate yourself. The config will look for them, and it'll use that to create an access token that you can use. So here we go. You will copy your access keys, your secret access keys, put them in here. And then what you need to do, or you'll need to set these environment variables. So since I have them in a shell script, I'm just going to source the file. So source cred.sh, and I have my real environment variables here in this cred.sh. This is just an example. My shell script looks exactly like this, just it has the real values. So I'm going to source that, and I'm going to run my code again. And you can see it has returned this string array, and the string array just has one string in it called tutorial. And if I go to my DynamoDB tables, you will see that that's the table I have, tutorial. So that's how we use it. What you do, it's the same no matter what service you're using. What you do is you get your package, you create a new client from the config. The client has access to all the different APIs for that service. So here I just listed my DynamoDB tables, which in this case is just tutorial, and I print it. If I want to do the exact same thing for S3, I can do that very easily. So I'll just create an S3 client. But first I need to install the S3 package. I'm just going to go to my old import for DynamoDB. I'm just going to change this to S3, and that'll install it. So now I will have an S3 client, and that is equal to S3. Same as before, new from config, passing the config. And then I'm just going to call this, I'm not going to call this API, but I'll show you that this S3 client has access to everything that you can do in S3. So you go client dot list buckets. So if I call this function, I'd obviously have to pass in a context, and then just like before, I would pass in a pointer to the list buckets input. It's in the S3 package, list buckets input, and then I would pass in any options I want, which in this case I don't need any. In most cases you will have to put set values in the input, but in this case I'm not going to. But that's basically all there is to it. No matter what service you're using, they all work the same. Create a client, the client can call the APIs. It's very straightforward, and they all work very similar.